Okay, hello, and welcome everyone to Dr. Rebecca Shaw's presentation on the status of the world's biodiversity. Welcome, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you invited me to be with you today. So thank you very much. Shall I start?
We're having a little bit of trouble hearing your audio.
Oh no.
Oh wait, there you are. Okay, I think it's because when I okay, you're good.
Okay, great. So you tell me when it's a time to start.
Okay, you're good to start.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for having me here to talk with you today about the status of biodiversity on the planet. I live my life trying to conserve biodiversity and to stop climate change. And so I'm always grateful when there are people who are willing to listen to me. What I'd like to do today is play a short video clip to give a conversation about how we think about biodiversity at WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and then take some questions or end with a video and take some questions. So the first video is kind of a depressing one, and only because I just want to make sure you're all awake and are ready for this. And I will play this. This is a video that WWF produced to help people understand the impacts of deforestation, which affects biodiversity gravely. So I will get this started. Oops. Maybe I won't.
We can see it now.
Okay.
Hello. Oh.
Okay, for some reason I am not able to.
We are currently having some technical difficulties. Sorry for the delay for those of you who are watching. When she is back, we can see the mouse moving.
You can see what?
Dr. Shaw, if you can hear what I'm saying, we can unsee your video. We just can't hear any of the audio since your computer's. Oh, you're moving now.
Yeah, it's not moving yet. For some reason, I'm not able to click into it. So I'm sorry for that. I'm not able to pull it up. So I'm going to stop sharing on this and go ahead and start the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And I can share the links.
For those who want to watch it.
Yeah, but if anybody wants to watch the videos, I'll share the links.
Okay, you can go ahead and drop those in the chat if you would like.
Okay. I'll do that once we start questions, if that's okay.
Okay, we see a monkey.
It's right, a gorilla.
Oh, a gorilla.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to talk to you about A Living Planet. My name is Dr. Rebecca Shaw. I am the chief scientist for WWF. I've been with WWF for 7 years. WWF is a very big conservation organization that works in 100 countries around the world. And even though we're called the World Wildlife Fund, we really focus on many, many issues besides just wildlife. And it's more broadly biodiversity, more broadly nature, and the most broadly, the health of the planet and the health of human beings. So it's not just wildlife we work on. I'm going to take you through some of what we work on, and then dial into why biodiversity is important to all the things that we care about. So WWF's mission is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and to build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature. And the reason why we have a dual mission that connects the health of the natural environment to human health and well-being is because they are inextricably interlinked. We know that if we continue to deforest, if we continue to pollute our rivers, streams, and oceans with a whole bunch of toxics, including plastics, if we continue to cause the degradation of multiple species around the planet, we ourselves will undermine our ability to thrive on this planet, to secure the food we need, to secure the fiber and the energy we need. So the mission of protecting nature on the planet is a mission of protecting human health and well-being. So key terms I just want to highlight is that biodiversity is used to be very narrowly defined as the number of species, say the number of plants, the number of animals in a particular area. It has, since its original definition in the mid-1970s, has been broadened to say it is the variety and the diversity of genes in a given area. So lots of a single species can have a diverse gene pool. It describes the diversity of species, the diversity of populations of species. So oftentimes you can have a certain rabbit that lives in one state, and that same species of rabbit lives in another state, but they don't interact. Those would be two different populations. And if you have a lot of those populations that are interacting just a little bit, that's a measure of diversity as well. The different types of ecosystems we have, river ecosystems, ocean ecosystems, different kinds of land ecosystems, forests, grasslands, all that also is a measure of diversity. And what we've also come to know is that when you have healthy ecosystems, healthy nature, it also provides a flow of services to people. We call those services ecosystem services. And that's a measure of diversity, of the diversity of services that are delivered to people, whether it's clean air, fresh water, healthy and abundant food, fiber, and a stable climate. Ecosystems then are just all of the species coming together, interacting, and sharing resources, and all the parts of an ecosystem are connected, and these connections are essential for the life on Earth. So ecosystems, as I'm talking about, can be studied at different scales. We focus on all of these different definitions of biodiversity and definitions and scales of ecosystems when we study nature, and nature is really key. As I was talking about before, I'm not going to read all this, but I want to again help you understand that biodiversity in all its definitions ensures healthy and secure food supply in a number of different ways. It pulls carbon dioxide out of the air. Trees in particular, but also seaweeds pull carbon dioxide out of the air and help store it in the long term, which helps deal with climate change. Also a really important part of biodiversity and the benefits that people get from biodiversity. Biodiversity maintains the regulation of water supply and water quality. So if you think about it, you have rainstorms that start the rain lands on the land, and that land stores rain for time and different times of use for different times of the season. Biodiversity also helps fight disease. Higher rates of biodiversity have been linked to increased human health. And biodiversity also benefits business. There is an institution run out of Switzerland called the World Economic Forum that made the estimate. This is a business organization that made the estimate that $44 trillion of the global gross domestic product, or all the money that is made every year around the globe, is highly or moderately dependent on nature and the health of nature. So it's critically important to us. On the other hand, there is an SOS for nature, and we're hearing it loud and clearly over and over again in the media. Every time we turn around, there's another headline about climate change and the loss of nature. And climate change and nature are also very interlinked. This is our what we're calling our global double emergency. Climate change may be talked about a lot more, but the loss of wildlife, the loss of habitats, the loss of ecosystems and their functions make sure that these two crises are interlinked. Rapid climate change threatens ecosystems and actually has caused local extinctions of populations of species, or species to move to go to places where they can get suitable habitat. Their suitable habitat is changing. It also, healthy ecosystems take up carbon dioxide, helping to regulate climate. But when the climate change is too extreme, it undermines the ability of ecosystems to take up the carbon dioxide. So it undermines it that way. And then a lot of our activities on the planet that are central for our living also create more climate change. So producing food, producing timber. And so there's a way in which climate change makes the nature crisis worse, the nature crisis makes climate change worse, and dealing with them together is the way forward. And I'll just get a little bit more specific about this. Healthy forests draw carbon from the atmosphere as CO2 and lock it into trees and to soil for long terms, sometimes hundreds of years. Climate change increases the risk of forest fires and invasive pests, which are especially damaging for forests that are fragmented by human activity. So climate change undermines the forest's ability to take up CO2, which further leads to more climate change. Climate change and nature are connected in the oceans. In a thriving ocean ecosystem, carbon is drawn from the atmosphere by phytoplankton and by seaweed and stored in wildlife biomass and sunk to the floor. Climate change, through both warming waters and through acidification, disrupts that flow and that uptake of carbon, again, creating more climate change and also creating conditions that are not suitable for many organisms to thrive. So decreasing biodiversity. So again, they're very tightly linked. Climate change is also increasing heat waves and droughts, and we've all experienced, or at least heard about, the way in which climate change is changing our weather patterns. As higher global temperatures are also creating threats to many different types of animals and plants around the world. An example is that during one single heat wave in Australia, in 2018, 23,000 flying fox bats died from the heat over 2 days, reducing its population in the entire nation by 1/3. That is a huge drop in a very short period of time. And Australia has been hit hard by climate change. The fires alone also that happened in 2020 reduced the population of koalas on the eastern side of that country by 69%. So a big decline. So what we try to do then is really check. We try to, as an organization, stay on top of the way biodiversity and climate is changing. And then we devise strategies for how to counter those things from happening, how to make sure that we're delivering a whole planet for future generations. And I'll talk to you a little bit first about how we actually measure the health of the planet, how WWF does this, and then what we do with that information once we measure. So every 2 years, we put out, we do a health check for the planet to show how the natural world is doing, the threats it's facing, and what this means for human. We call this the Living Planet Report. The Living Planet Report draws heavily on the Living Planet Index. And the Living Planet Index is a measure. It's just a metric about how populations of animals, wild animals are doing, wild vertebrates are doing around the globe. We measure 32,000 populations, 5,200 species. So, of course, some of the species, we are measuring multiple populations of the same species. And since we're measuring them across the oceans, across the rivers and freshwater systems and in land systems, we're getting a really good picture about whether nature is intact or not, or whether it's unraveling and what the consequences of that unraveling would be. So when we focus on, and we summarize this data region by region and at a global scale. This helps us get the information we need to target our interventions to reverse the trends that are deleterious. So at a global scale, with the Living Planet Index, the last one that we put together was in 2022, just last year, just a couple months ago. It shows which is our early warning indicator, shows that all the animals, all the populations, the mammals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds that we are following have declined from 1970 to 2018 by 69%. Now that means that if you used to see a lot of robins in your yard when your parents were younger, or your parents used to see a lot of robins in their yard in the springtime, and they had 100 robins every year come by, that population of robins would be decreased by 69%. So you would see that many fewer robins. It doesn't mean the robins are going extinct, and it doesn't mean that it's inevitable that they will, because they may be living and thriving elsewhere. But what it means is that population of robins is in trouble. And the fact that it's in trouble will have specific meaning for the functioning of that ecosystem and its ability to deliver goods and services to human beings. Now, LPI is only one indicator. There are lots of other indicators, but I'll tell you why we use this particular indicator. The Living Planet Index measures abundance, so populations of species around the globe across a range of different species. And it gives us what we think is the early warning indicator, so we can intervene. Some of the other indices or metrics that you might use, the red list, which measures extinction risk, measure the health of the ecosystem too far down the road. Once an animal, a plant is near extinction, it's really hard to bring an animal back from extinction, to have it functioning in the ecosystem again. So we like to use the LPI because it gives us information before an animal or a plant gets into trouble, into too much trouble, so we can intervene. There's also the Species Habitat Index that measures habitat, and the Biodiversity Intactness Index, which is a measure of how much things are getting degraded across a whole range of species. I think that the best way to handle measuring biodiversity or nature's decline is to combine these indices together. Now we don't see the same declines across freshwater, ocean, and land. That 69% is across all those different kinds of ecosystems. But the one that's getting hardest hit is the freshwater ecosystems. And that is because freshwater is so important for so many uses, for growing food, for transportation, and for drinking water, and for running industrial processes. So there are lots of stresses that are put on freshwater systems in this country and other countries around the globe. And speaking about around the globe, changes in biodiversity really do differ around the globe. You can see that what these graphs show you is that continent by continent by continent, how the changes, or how the different LPI changes across these different, you see a lesser decrease, or a smaller decline in North America, and a much larger decline, in fact, the largest decline in Latin America. That's very much because they have a lot of intact ecosystems already that are being depleted at a very rapid rate. And you'll see that in the news all the time with the Amazon rainforest and the deforestation going on there, and so forth. So it varies across the world. So what's causing all this loss of nature and this loss of biodiversity? And the LPR and what we study shows that the drivers of the decline of nature or biodiversity are dependent on the ecosystem, but in general are these 5 things: changes in the way we use land, say for agriculture, or for energy production, or for where we put our houses and where we put our cities, and the way we use the ocean and the sea and water, including habitat loss and degradation. So when you go in and you want to grow more crops, you cut down all the trees and till the soils. That creates a very, very significant decline in nature locally. And if that's happening everywhere, you will see these signals at a global scale. Species overexploitation is also a very important thing. Not as much, although there are many communities in this country that are dependent on hunting and fishing for their nourishment. This is really the case in a lot of places around the globe. And so harvesting species for food, for fiber, and for other uses is a significant driver of decline. As are invasive species and disease. You have a new disease come in, it can wipe out an entire tree species or an entire animal species. Pollution is very important. And then finally, climate change. And one thing I'll say about climate change is, although it isn't the top driver of biodiversity decline, it is the fastest increasing driver of biodiversity decline. The top is land use and sea use, second is species exploitation, and these are actually in order of their significance. I would just say that in the terrestrial, on land, habitat destruction, habitat loss and degradation is the largest driver of change, and species exploitation is the largest driver of change in the marine realm. Okay, so this is way too much data. And it's really what this is just showing you is the way these different drivers of biodiversity loss manifest themselves around the globe is really different region to region to region, depending on how people are using resources. But it doesn't matter where you go around the globe, habitat degradation and loss is still the greatest, and then second by the over exploitation. But this just gives you a sense of how much those drivers of loss vary across the world, because it helps you think about how we as a conservation organization need to think differently when we walk into a country in Asia versus a country in Africa, or for the work we do in this country. The way we use natural resources really shows up, shows itself on a global map as well. So not only are the drivers different across the globe, the way these different regions and countries use natural resources is really, really important to pay attention to, because it also gives you a hint about how you might approach changing the trajectory or changing those trends and what you might need to target. So what this shows you, this map shows you, is the global, it's the global map of an ecological footprint of consumption. How much land does how much consumption is there per person? So the really dark colors, the gray is insufficient data. The darkest purple is very, very high consumption per capita or per person. The light pinks are low consumption. And what you can see is that although we're have very strong declines in biodiversity in Latin America isn't the place where most consumption and most of the drivers of change are happen, where they're not consuming the products that are creating the driver or creating that change. That is really the countries that are really driving the change on the planet are in North America, in Europe, and Australia primarily. So this also gives you a clue to where you might be able to begin to change some of the dynamic. So where and how we choose to proceed really depends on threats to the biodiversity and to planet's ecosystems. If you look globally across the world, and if you really say what's going on with biodiversity and nature, what pops out immediately is that the way we produce food, consume, and waste food pops up as a really important thing in tackling climate change and in tackling the decline of biodiversity. Agriculture to produce food and fiber is responsible for 80% of all the global biodiversity. The drivers linked to food production cause 70% of all the biodiversity loss then. Agriculture accounts for 70% of all freshwater use, which is why you see such a sharp decline in the freshwater living planet index. The sharpest decline to 83% from 1970 to 2018. The drivers linked to food production cause 50% of the freshwater biodiversity loss, and 52% of the agricultural production land is degraded, and food systems release almost 30% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to a changing climate. So automatically, and this is how we think at WWF, if you can do something about food, you can do something the way we produce, consume, and waste food. You can really have an impact on the planet. And that's what we've really been thinking about. How do we change in a positive way, in ways that are healthy for people and healthy for the planet, the way we produce food? Can we make agriculture regenerative? Can we make sure that when we do produce food, it's produced in a place and in a way that doesn't destroy the planet? I think that's an essential thing to do. And so with the choices we make with respect to our food and energy use right now will shape climate and biodiversity outcomes long into the future. So if you think about how we tackle those drivers, we can do status quo choices with current policies and values leading to increasing pressures and increasing loss of biodiversity and climate change, or we can begin to transition our relationship with food and how we produce it and how we consume it, and the same with energy, to transform the leading causes of climate change and biodiversity. And so we did a little study in the science team at WWF with some of our partners. And this is just a graph that shows you time and a biodiversity indicator value. and shows you that if we do nothing, we're going to follow that gray line where we're going to lose more and more biodiversity. If we increase our conservation, if we're continuing to set up parks and protected areas and work with animal populations around the globe, we can begin to change the trajectory of the biodiversity loss, but not enough. It's where we couple the increased conservation efforts with food, and then here this is called integrated action portfolio, but with really tackling food and the food waste and food production, that we really begin to get changes in biodiversity and begin to what we call bend the curve so that it begins to move forward. And that's what we're trying to do right now. We're really trying to move this biodiversity loss to stop the decline, begin the upward trend, and go back to full recovery by 2050. Food is the way to really take this on, is one of the ways to take this on. So what could you do? So first you start with the way we produce food. Be really cognizant of where your food is coming from and whether or not it is being grown in a way that is destructive to the environment. Is it causing deforestation in the Amazon or not? And this kind of information by product is you can find that out pretty easily. When you buy food, make sure that you eat it. Food waste causes that 40% of all the food in the US that is produced or that we buy is wasted. It's wasted either because you leave it in the refrigerator and it goes bad and you throw it out, or we don't finish our plates, or we take too much and we throw it out. But 40% is wasted. If we could just turn that 40% into usable food, so we don't have that waste, that takes a lot of pressure off the planet. And the last thing is, some foods that you could choose to eat have a heavier footprint than other foods. And I'm sure that you know what some of these are. So red meat has a really heavy footprint. It takes 10 times the resources to produce a pound of red meat than it does a pound of soybeans. So it doesn't mean you stop eating red meat, because culturally it's really important to a lot of us. It just means that sometimes you might want to choose sometimes to turn to chicken or to a plant-based protein maybe once or twice a week instead of eating red meat every meal. And some people do eat red meat every meal, so it's a real thing. And that will help us bend the curve on biodiversity loss and begin to address a changing climate. And with this, I want to let you know that I'm very hopeful. I am not at all. I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to solve these very big global issues, one community at a time. And I tell you, one of the reasons why I'm really, really hopeful is when I started my career and started working on this, there weren't very many of us talking about these issues, about climate and biodiversity loss, even though the issues were very significant at the beginning of my career. Now, I see people talking about it everywhere. It's in media, it's in social media. There are groups around, and youth groups, most importantly, by the way, around protecting climate, cleaning up rivers and streams, making sure that populations of animals and plants are thriving in their communities. And so when I look to hope, I say two things. Lots more people are focused on this challenge and the solutions than ever before. And the youth movement is incredibly important to driving that change, finding solutions, and to educating themselves and finding careers to be a significant part of the solution in the future. So I'm super hopeful. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today. And with that, I will turn it over to Debbie for moderating the questions.
Hello. Debbie is just the name of the lady's computer that we're using.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. That's awful. I'm so sorry. I knew that your name. I was.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
I'm Tori and this is Yandel.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. We learned a lot of interesting facts. Okay, so our first question is, what type of ecosystem have you worked with the most?
Ooh, I did all of them actually. I mean, I have to say all of them because I did my undergraduate degree in marine biology. So I was a research diver for many years, and then I started working on lakes and rivers, and I worked in the Amazon for years and years, and I did diving there even though there's nothing to see. It was really. And then I've worked in forests and grasslands as well. So really a lot of them. I have to tell you that I really love working in marine biology though, because when you go scuba diving and you go under the water, it is a different planet. It's so beautiful and so amazingly different from what we experience every day. So I really liked my time being a marine research diver.
Sorry. So our next question.
Is what is your favorite type of ecosystem to
Oh,
be
wait,
in?
sorry. That's the one we just
Oh,
asked.
wait.
Oh, this one.
Is there anything the WWF is doing right now to fight the climate change?
Yeah, that is a really great question. We are working on a lot of things around climate. So just like the food issue, the climate change issue is has a lot of diverse solutions. And so the way we're working on that is we're making sure we're protecting ecosystems and conserving ecosystems and restoring ecosystems that absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, draw it down and store it long term. So forests are really good for that, particularly tropical forests can take up a lot of carbon, and they've been deforested. And so there's lots of opportunities to restore them. Coastal mangroves and wetlands are really great at storing carbon. And so we're working on restoring those as well. And we're also working on trying to figure out how to create a food production system that generates less greenhouse gases. And so one of the projects is figuring out how to use seaweed that's grown in a farm-like setting, feed that or put that into cow feed, and by doing that, it means that it reduces the amount of methane that comes from cows. And one of the reasons why cows and red meat are so impactful on the environment is because they produce methane when they burp. And so it would decrease the amount of methane that comes out of cows and decrease the footprint of cows. And so those are three ways on nature's side that we're working, but we're also making sure that we're clearing the way we're working and partnering with energy companies to make sure that they can site and operate renewable energy facilities in a way that doesn't undermine the natural systems around that. And so both working on nature that sucks up CO2 from the atmosphere, and also working on renewable energy that keeps the CO2, displaces fossil fuels, which keeps CO2 from being put in the atmosphere. Those are two ways that we're working on climate change that are really complementary and very important.
Right. So what is one thing humans living in cities can do to help our ecosystems?
Yeah, it's such a funny thing about cities, because when you live in a city and you're walking everywhere and you're taking the bus, you're taking the metro, you have a much smaller footprint than, say, somebody who's living in the suburbs and driving everywhere and driving to the store, driving to school, driving to work. So city folks already do really good on the climate change side. One thing, though, that folks in the city can do is make sure they take advantage of those options that they have not to drive, because driving is very impactful. And if you don't have a electric car, which most of us don't have, it is you can eliminate your fossil fuel emissions or decrease your fossil fuel emissions. The other thing is just to think about what you consume, food, clothes, and your furnishings for your house, and making sure that they are being produced in a sustainable way, and that when you're buying only what you need and you're using what you need, and then you're repurposing what you have when you're done with it, so that you're recycling it or you're getting it to a thrift shop so somebody else can use it. If you can not buy as much, so the reduce, reuse, recycle is a really important thing in this whole set of solutions. You reduce what you consume, you reuse everything, get it out the door so somebody else can use it when you're done with it, and then make sure when it's at the end of its life, any objects at the end of its life, make sure it gets recycled, and only buy things that can be recycled.
Sure.
All right, for the next question is, what is one species you think needs more attention in the care for saving?
We often focus what we call apex species, because they're dominant species in an ecosystem that are dependent on other parts of the ecosystems, and lots of other parts of the ecosystem depend on them. So these apex species, these species that really drive whether an ecosystem is going to be healthy or not. So I think about, in many countries around the globe, we focus on tigers, because if you get it right for tigers, because they need a lot of land, they need a lot of forest, they need a lot of prey species to eat, they need places to breed, they need places to roam and to hunt. So if you get it right for tigers, you get it right for a lot of species. So tigers is one of those very important species we focus on. And elephants are another one in Africa, and in Indonesia that we focus on. So we always think about, when you do something good for one species, how do you make sure that there's trickle down to lots of other species and other populations? So I say tigers and elephants.
Where is biodiversity best in the world?
Oof, that's a really good question. Because with all those threats, it's really hard right now to go to places and not see all those threats. But I will say that I lived in the Amazon, and still, when you go into the Amazon forest, it is still the most amazingly remote place that's intact, with crazy species of insects and birds and reptiles and mammals you just never seen anywhere else. So the Amazon is really so amazing. So a place that is being protected and conserved, and that's very important. Another place that maybe some of you would not have heard about is Papua in Indonesia. There are just amazing coral reefs there, and the diving is the most colorful, the most species diverse, and the most beautifully textured on the planet. And I fell in love with it, and it's just so diverse. And when you see that diversity come together in a natural habitat in an untouched way, you really understand why it's so important to protect ecosystems as a whole, not just species by species by species.
Oh, my bad. Do you believe we are currently living in another mass extinction?
So I think it's a really important question. We are calling this era the sixth mass extinction. And the reason why we do that is there is a background extinction rate. We always have species turning over, like evolving, thriving, and then dying out for whatever reason, because the habitat isn't suitable, because the prey base isn't there, because the climate isn't suitable. But we are way above background rate right now. We are 100 to 1,000 times above background rate. And when we think about the past mass extinction, and there's been 5 of them, the extinctions really, some of those extinctions wiped out 75% of all the mammals on the planet. All mammal species on the planet, the last extinction did. That was that, or the dinosaurs on the planet, the animals. That kind of extinction is so massive. Right now, we're 100 to 1,000 times higher. That's, of course, much, much higher than that, but we're on the road. And if we don't work to bend the curve on species loss, and those graphs I was showing show how we could do that, we will be in the 6th mass extinction. Many people say we're already there because the extinction rates are so high. And so I would say we're seeing the beginning of the 6th mass extinction.
Can one species dying out affect another species on the other side of the world?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It depends. It depends on the species, of course. When you can have species, a species that is a really important trading species, say a fish that is traded for food like cod, it declines and goes locally extinct. And then that puts the pressure on another fish and another fishery in some other part of the world. So once we saw the cod fisheries really decline, the tilapia fisheries really came up. And so, yeah, through humans, mediated by human use, we do see these really big changes in species use, and then species decline because of that.
How are the biodiversity declining factors influencing Antarctica's populations?
How are the biodiversity declines? We are seeing, because of the warming, I don't know if you all know this, but when climate changes, where we have over a degree of Celsius of change, warming on the planet, that isn't distributed evenly. You have much greater warming at the poles, up to 15 degrees in some seasons. And so what you're seeing is real declines in increases in the ocean temperature and melting of ice, more fresh water in the ocean. And so you're seeing real changes in the prey base. And when I say prey base, it's what do the big things eat? What do the leopard seals eat? What do the whales eat? So declines and changes in krill, in particular krill populations, which feeds all these other animals. That is really, really important change that's happening in the Antarctic.
What is your favorite animal and why?
Oh yeah, so I have to say the whale shark. It's massive and beautiful and slow moving, and you can swim with it and be amazed by its movements without being hyper fearful because it's such a huge and gentle giant. And so I think the times I've been most crazy excited to be in the water was when I was with dolphins or whale sharks. And I got to tell you, whale sharks are just the most fascinating.
What's the best fast food to eat with the smallest carbon footprint?
Ooh, that is a great question. So it depends on which fast food chain you go to and what you're actually eating. So I already said beef's a problem. So you got to stay away from beef if you're trying to lower your carbon footprint. Anything that goes to plant proteins as opposed to animal proteins will have a lower carbon footprint. So I would say, and then some fast food chains are better at others in sourcing their foods locally. And so given you line all those up, because all those things are important for the carbon footprint, I would say you would go for like a bean burrito at Chipotle or something like that.
Oh, does the WWF have any volunteering opportunities?
Yeah, the WWF has internship opportunities, and they're posted on our website. Volunteering happens usually in the field programs, which is we mostly work over globally in other countries, but in this country we work in the prairie region in Montana and Wyoming. And so there are often voluntary opportunities in the field there. But we do have paid internships that I encourage you all to look into when to see if they are right for you.
How can young people take specific action against these factors or look for a career similar to yours?
The one thing, so there almost anything I would say, think about your personal actions, your professional actions, and then your career, what you want to do for your career. So personal action is, we've already talked about how you can consume things differently and how you reduce and reuse, recycle, super important. Secondly, my career, the career opportunities are so big in this field compared to what they were when I entered it. And so when I think that, somebody with my skills now could, as opposed to going into academics or into a conservation organization, like I did both of those, you can go into almost any industry. All different companies have sustainability offices. Every company, every government is worried about its impact on nature, its impact on the climate, and trying to reduce that. So there are lots more opportunities. I would say the most important thing is find an opportunity that takes advantage of your skills and what you love to do. So that may be being somebody who plants trees in the Forest Service because you love to be outside and you love to be outside every day and you love to be in nature and you love that kind of thing. Or it may be if you're really good at math, or it could be developing the code to optimize the supply chain for an agricultural company. So it really depends on your skill set, what you love to do, and then figuring out how to match that skill set and what you love to do with the offerings that are out there. And all I'll say is there are so many different opportunities, and it's so wide open right now that I wouldn't limit yourself and just really focus on doing what you love and focus on finding the right fit.
Another question is, what's the most efficient thing that any person could do to mitigate climate change and help prevent biodiversity loss?
The two biggest drivers of biodiversity change, biodiversity loss and climate are energy production and consumption and food production and consumption. So whatever you could do in your daily lives to reduce your consumption of those, make choices that reduce your consumption, the better off the planet will be. You can also ask your local legislators or your local state policymakers to make changes in the way they do business and the way they manage the state that are in line with your values as they relate to biodiversity and climate change. And lastly, when you get active, don't be quiet about it. Be on social media, talk to your friends about what you think is important and why, and how you think they could be a part of it. So I think it's really your individual action, making sure that people have power now, do what you would like and implement your values, and then express your values to your peer group. And don't be afraid of changing things. I mean, I'm most excited about the activation of this generation for the kind of change and to create the world they want to see and to not take no for an answer. And so really put yourself out there because it's really valuable.
All right. Does the WWF have programs to support education and destruction and or economic problems?
Yeah, we do. We have one of the things that's so important in any of the work that we do is you can do conservation, but if local populations don't appreciate it or don't value it, or if their needs are so different that just their daily activity undermines the things you're trying to achieve, it's really important that you understand that and that you provide economic opportunities that would allow them to thrive while biodiversity is thriving and greenhouse gases are not being emitted. So it's really important that you pay attention to what local communities need and then put in place solutions that make sense for those local communities. So we have capacity building programs to train local communities on conservation, on science, and also on developing economic opportunities that can help their villages or their communities thrive in the face of climate change and to reduce the impacts.
What is your opinion on DNA splicing and reintroducing species that have been previously extinct?
Oof. This is a tough one because I know why it captures imagination, and I know that with the development of really targeted gene editing, we're in a whole different world about what possibilities are. I always thought that kind of gene editing could be used to help existing species better adapt to climate change and a changing environment, as opposed to bringing new species in that don't really have a niche anymore. New species meaning species that were once on the earth but no longer are. So I feel my view is it is really important for us to pay attention to what we have now and to manage what we have now, to make sure that species aren't going extinct and that populations that are declining become robust once again, and not to bring back new species that have gone extinct, because it's like setting a species loose when there's nothing for them to eat, or there isn't the habitat that they once used, and so on. So species without their home, without their habitats, without the interaction with the other species that are so important is problematic. So I would say, let's keep alive what we have today and focus on that when our planet is whole again.
What would your favorite land species be?
Favorite land species? I would have to say, this is a hard one. I would actually, so I live in California, and there is a bird called the California thrasher, and it is not the most glorious looking bird, but it is cool. It's really cool looking. It's brown and it has some nice patterns, but it has this crazy beak and it has the most amazing song. And it actually mimics a lot of other bird songs. And so it's constantly kind of trolling other species by making them think that their friends are nearby, and for no real purpose, just having fun. And so I like the name, the California thrasher. I love the look of the bird. It's amazingly sleek. And it also has a funny habit of singing other birds' songs and to confuse them. So that would be the California thrasher.
What is an example of something you do in your home that we can recreate to help the environment?
Oh my goodness. So one of my priorities is to not buy anything that has plastic associated with it. That is so hard. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not successful at it yet, but I'm really doing everything I can to reduce the amount of plastic that comes in my house. So many great products are being developed that are substituting plant-based polymers for, for plastics, and also cardboard for plastics. And so that's one of the things you could do. I'm trying to get rid of plastics. I've already done eating low on the food chain, or eating a planet-friendly diet. So I don't eat a lot of red meat. And so now I'm really trying to tackle climate change. I mean, tackle the plastic reduction, because plastics are a fossil fuel-based product.
All right, and our last question. How would organizations like the WWF work to fix disasters like oil spills and the truck spill in Ohio?
I think that the most important way to address that in the long term is to move our entire energy system to renewable energies that don't have those kind of disasters and catastrophes. Once it happens, though, I mean, and then the second thing is to make sure that we have safety protocols in place to protect people and wildlife from the impacts of spills like that. So where you can be right on it when they happen. And then, of course, it's really important that you be able to restore people's backyards, their communities, to healthy environment, and also restore the natural environment so that people can thrive. So those are three things. Long term, we got to go to renewable energies for the planet and for people. We won't have these kind of disasters if the bulk of our energy is produced through renewables.
All right, thank you so much. For all of our viewers, I would like to point out that Dr. Shaw did drop the links to the videos that were supposed to be a part of her presentation into the chat. So if you would like to copy and paste them so that you can watch them, go for it. We do have one final announcement before we end for the day. The National Biodiversity Teach-In is a student project that happens because we have so many partners supporting us. One of those partners is Earth Echo International. We are excited to partner with Earth Echo International to promote an opportunity to empower our peers across the country. This year, Earth Echo is excited to open our Echo Challenge STEM competition to students in the U.S. grades 5 through 9. 10 finalist teams will advance for a chance to win top prizes of $1,000, $2,500, and $5,000. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Thank you so much, Dr. Shaw, for your time and for being willing to do this. We really appreciate your presentation.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for your interest.